Let me let you know who's here in the studio with us, joining us. You've seen the serialization, perhaps, of a book that he's written. And as we go into some of the conversations in terms of what Kenya's doing at the helm of COMESA at the moment, Erastus Mwencha is the former COMESA Secretary General and AU Deputy Chairperson and joins us in studio this morning. Good morning, Bwana Mwencha.
Very well. Thank you very much, my sister.
You're well?
Yes, I've been watching you since 6. You must be tenacious, really, to be here and strong up to this time, 9.
It's the drugs that Dennis Okari provides.
Yeah. Do you people ever sleep?
We try to.
Yeah, okay.
We try to, and not upside down like the bat, but somehow.
Okay.
But thank you for joining us this morning. Obviously, there's a lot. You're no stranger to the things that happen around Africa. So even as we welcome you this morning, Dennis is going to share some words from Liberia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So the proverb today we get from Liberia: no matter how long the dry season lasts, the rain will come again. No matter how long the dry season lasts, the rain will come again. How would you interpret that?
Do you want me to be honest?
Yes,
Of course.
I was watching you at 6, and this was the same proverb that you raised.
Yes.
So I was coming here hoping that you give me a different one.
Oh.
But I'll try on that one. And I think it's Dennis who brought the idea that when he quoted the book of Proverbs and saying, you may have darkness all night, but
joy comes in the morning.
in the morning.
Yes.
I think that sums it all, in my view. But I can add to that, if you look at even powers that be around the world, no power has ever survived more than a century or more than even 3 decades. They all come and go. And I think it reminds us as human beings that we are here for a season and we'll depart. And so we prepare ourselves for eventuality. And for Christians, we know what that means. Yes.
Well put. That's deep, eh?
It is quite deep, Bwana Mwencha. You've been listening all morning, and even though the proverb remains the same, obviously the depth that you bring to it is new and refreshing.
Yes.
So thank you so much for that. We're looking into COMESA and, of course, Kenya's role in COMESA today. And folks may say, okay, that seems a little bit left field, but all right, let's look at the way the world is operating at the moment. And that regional bodies, for the longest time, have great importance in terms of how these regions now contribute to global politics and the global economic system. And it doesn't really matter what you look at. You look at the Arab League, when you look at the European Union, when you look at the African Union, when you look at bodies like NATO, for example, who've come together because of their regional geographical positioning and the things that they're able to do. The world is going through in units what we're going to look at as nationalism, where everybody is looking inward and trying to get a situation whereby they do better as individual units to allow them to come together into better regional bodies for a better world, as cliche as that may be. Africa has tried that as well. In the north of Africa, where you have that conglomeration, where you have ECOWAS in West Africa, where you have IGAD, you have EAC, you have COMESA, SADC, and such. We're looking at COMESA today. And the recolonization of Africa, whether you want to take it that way or not, we're in the throes of it. And it is happening today. But it's coming in a different way, with a bit of softer power, perhaps. And the thought that Africa then needs to come together as unified bodies, but also as strong units, is very strong in the minds of many. COMESA is one such body that wants to bring people together, the common market for East and Southern Africa, and with Kenya at its helm in terms of putting policies together. What can COMESA do today that is going to cement the position for Africa on the global trade scene? Let's start off from there.
Thank you. In your intro, you've made profound statement looking at the global aspect, the geopolitics of it, but also regionalism and what you have also rightly tagged as nationalism. that is on the rise and the rest. And then, of course, in the end, the question is, what can COMESA do? There's no question about the fact that no country can survive as an island today. And we are all interrelated in one way or the other. And yes, Europe united at the back of US supporting that integration because they were under threat from communism, or call it socialism, the Russians. And so it was to barricade Western Europe with that iron curtain. America itself grew from the fact that many of the people who left Europe went to America, and America prospered, became a strong nation. And today America is struggling to stay at the top. And part of the geopolitics that you refer to is that. But if you go back to history and see how, colonialism, which you referred to, or mercantilism under colonial slave trade and the rest, there was always a question of raw materials, markets, and also dominance. But that's not the game today. Today, the game is about technology. The game today is to be able to also access markets. The game today is to be able to have geopolitical influence around the world. And so, yes, but where does COMESA stand in this? Africa, as you also mentioned, under colonialism, suffered in many ways. Split among European nations, French Africa, Anglo-Africa, Luso Africa, which is, of course, Portuguese and the rest. Africa was never talking to each other. And so when you look at aspects of whether it's trade and other aspects of, human relations, Africa has very little with each other. And that's what COMESA is trying to address. In fact, the history of COMESA goes back to independence, when the leaders met in Addis Ababa on 25th May, and they said, look, let AU concentrate on liberation, let us create economic communities. And that's how COMESA was created. That's the journey COMESA is on. The beauty today, COMESA is now talking to other regional groupings like SADC, like East African Community. They have now come up with a tripartite. Now, what can it do? I think it's good to give in a specific case like Kenya. Kenya, as you rightly mentioned, is at the helm, and you saw they hosted. This is not the first time Kenya is hosting. In fact, it's the third time. And Kenya has always understood the benefits of belonging to COMESA. It gives Kenya a bigger market. And if, like we mentioned the case of Kenya, take, say, one product. Kenya today sells tea to a big market in COMESA, to Sudan, to Egypt, to Libya, Tunisia, where tea is never grown. And that's the kind of thing that people never realize, that Africa can trade with each other. And so, yes, that is the benefit that it will bring. That bigger market, but also uniting for us. Imagine where now we can be able to sell this tea in West Africa, in Southern Africa, like South Africa, which consumes under tripartite. That will be a big market for Kenya, say, one product. And so on. So I can go on. And so let me allow that you ask leading questions, because I've just put a large picture. And I think now let's go dive in.
Yeah, I'm glad you've painted that picture. And I'm just looking, I'm just trying to have this comparison, what it essentially is designed to do. And you look at the current state of affairs in different countries that are part of this. And I'm just thinking, these regional blocks as they are currently constituted, and in this case we're talking about COMESA, still relevant in their current structure? And I'm asking this because we've had trade wars between these countries that we're still talking about, yet under COMESA, there is what has been agreed. There are structures that do exist. But you tend to see different administrations then get into these trade tiffs, as you might call, that essentially then end up affecting businesses and affecting markets and the flow of goods and products or even services. Yet, we have a structure and we have a block called COMESA. How do we correlate these two?
Yes. In your question, the first aspect you asked is, what is COMESA designed to do? Integration is one of really the priorities of COMESA. And what do we mean by integration? Because integration is to bringing two economies which operate separately to start working with each other over time. And eventually, in fact, integration goes through various stages. You can start with just trade. Then you create a common market where you allow goods and services to flow across the border. Eventually, you become like one nation. I mean, if you go to states, people always forget that states, United States of America, there are 50 or so states that make United States. But when you travel in the states, you never even realize that you have crossed a border. Today, you do realize. That's the journey that COMESA has embarked to do together with the African Union at the helm. Now, you also implied in your question that current state of affairs doesn't reflect that journey is really progressing well. I couldn't agree with you more. As you know, integration itself is a process, and you bring in two parts to bring them together. These parts have to learn each other, understand each other, remove all the fears and all the obstacles. Some obstacles are human cost, others are physical. So removing them takes time. And that's why you see trade wars sometimes happen in that context. And so it's a process itself. It takes time for you to achieve that.
One would ask the question, you look at COMESA, Africa Union, but let's go to individual countries. And if at all these countries understand what working together, what unity, what trading together would mean, not just for the country, but for the people of the continent, do they understand the importance of working together and speaking in one voice? Because fine, we would quote the likes of European Union and what that has done to the 27 countries. Does African governments understand the need of working together?
A very good question, and a complex one for that matter. In the sense that, when you are dealing with a nation state, a nation, when it's projecting its external interests, looks at three things. One, of course, its own interests. What are the interests of that state? The second one is values that it wants to project as a nation to the rest of the world. And the third one is power, because every nation wants to be felt around in the room and all that. And because of that, selfishness does kick in. And hence, what you imply that, yes, all is not going well sometimes, because even when they all understand that we are better off working together. Hence, the book that she referred to, we have written, says, we are better off rising together. In fact, the theme of that book is, separate, we die. But together, we can rise up. We can have our voice. Because today, even all these complaints about AGOA and the rest, if Africa spoke with one voice, 55 states say, hey, America, thank you very much. You're not going to extend AGOA to us. We'll go separate ways. US will come running after. But what they do, they come and pick you one by one. They make you look good. And you go a separate way. So you all talk 55 voices. That is the danger. And the question you're asking is important. That is what we have never understood, that when we are united. For instance, today, Africa has got some of the critical minerals the world is looking after. If Africa sat together and say, we are going to determine the price and how you take these minerals, the rest of the world will power and say, what do you want us to do with you? But because they come, each country, you saw the other day, somebody goes to DRC and says, we'll stop this war, but give us all your minerals. DRC powers down. That's the danger. And that's what colonialism did to us. We still have those colonial inroads into us. We still have the superpowers inroads into us. We have never learned the game that together we are strong, separate, we seek.
You're deputy at the AU, and one would look at African Union as a body that speaks for the continent, and one that also gives direction. So in terms of these discussions on unity of the continent and speaking in one voice, are these conversations at that high level that then COMESA would feed off that and spread it?
You know, I was fortunate to work with people like Gaddafi. Much as he was not liked by the rest of the world, Gaddafi is one of those people who argued that we should have one foreign minister speaking on behalf of Africa. So now, if you have 55 foreign ministers speaking, which voice do you listen to? Because Africa can only be united when you start speaking in one voice.
But isn't that
We're now speaking 55 voices. The unity, of course, and that's what I said, integration is a journey, it's a process, it's not an event. When we reach that point that we can now allow us that to say, you speak on our behalf on foreign policy, or even Europe has not attained that. In fact, what Europe now do, they all meet, then cover a position. Each one of them then speaks to that script, but they don't speak 27 of them all. From one voice.
But they
so
meet.
that because they carve that. Africa tries that a lot. And that's why, for instance, if you go to the UN, Africa has 3 positions. And what is ideal is a position is taken in Addis Ababa. Once it's taken, these 3 now articulate that position.
But even
by and large, they do that. Yes.
Sorry, Bonaventure, but even this position that is now held at the African Union, did you see the filibustering that took place before that position was arrived at, before the voting even took place? Africa was already polarized when it came to that decision. How are we going to get to the place where African countries can coalesce around an idea and then take that to the global stage? Gaddafi, in his right, knew what he was talking about when he said, guys, he was a seer. And he said, the way to be able to deal with this thing is to come together. And that's where the ideas of the Organization of African Unity then came about. Kwame Nkrumah had ideas about this before Gaddafi. And it was on those conversations that they came together and said, you know what, guys, this is actually what we ought to do. Where did we lose it along the way? Because you've just said something very important, that even the European countries, they may not have one idea, but they come together and carve an idea. We don't do that. We have an African Union that's funded externally. We have an African Union for which members don't even pay their yearly dues. How do we come together and coalesce to carve out ideas about our future when housekeeping issues we cannot even take care of? How?
That's loaded. But let me answer one question among the issues that you mentioned. Where did we lose it? To me, we lost it in 1963 in Addis Ababa when they were crafting to put together the Organization of African Unity. There were 2 voices in the room. One by Nkrumah, who argued that let's start the African Union project now to unite Africa. Nyerere argued, no, let's start gradually. So Nyerere argued for gradualism, and that's what we also say in the book. So that he argued that, okay, and we can also start with the regional blocks, which later on, will be as building blocks for United States of Africa. That journey has taken long, and in any case, at some stage, we are being balkanized. Even our regional blocks.
Absolutely.
We are SADC, we are COMESA, we are ECOWAS. And so we have never really, yet at the end of the day, we are all Africans. In my view, I always say, I'm an African of Kenyan origin. Not many people understand that statement. Many of us are always, I'm a Kenyan. And that is the challenge that we have globally, or call it at continent level.
Would you think
the moment we transform, so I wanted to answer the question where we lost it. And so along the journey, we have been struggling to get that path right. That's why along the way, people like Gaddafi came. There was a time when we were transforming OAU to AU, and you had the likes of Obasanjo, of Mbeki, of, Bouteflika. Those were very much committed to us working together. That's why they came with programs like NEPAD.
Yes.
So they come with the program to say, look, even when we face international community, because let's not fool ourselves that Africa can be an island. They said we shouldn't be going with our small baskets individuals. Let's design continental programs so that we approach international community together. Now, that has also not really brought what you might call significant transformation in the continent. So yes, we all understand everybody knows the disease, but it looks like we are still in the laboratory to find a cure.
So, would you have agreed with Nkrumah, or would you have gone the Nyerere way?
Me, I would have agreed with Nkrumah. Even now, I regret that Nkrumah didn't manage to get the way, because Nkrumah was very clear that yes, we got flag independence. They gave us flags, but they never gave us economy. And that's what has eluded us up to now.
What is stopping the continent from sitting at the table and agreeing on the way forward? Because all along you hear decisions are being made by former colonialists. Why can't African governments just sit and agree, we are African, Africa is our business, and this is our agenda?
When we start thinking Africa, that will be easier. Because we still think Kenyan, we still think Luo, we still think Kikuyu, we still think, you see, we haven't transformed ourselves, carried ourselves to think that big. And that is the disease that we still have to cure. And I hope, because if you look at our young generation, you can see impatience, especially among the Gen Zs and the rest, that people are not going to sit idle with biting unemployment. With even in any economy, when you have a large population that is left behind, that population will always be a time bomb. And that's why countries like China were so smart. They came up with programs that has lifted over 1 billion people out of poverty, because they understood that development that is not does not have a human face, development that is not going to transform people, will eventually leave you in a very unstable situation. Africa must come to terms to that, to say, if we don't work together, we will continue to be a market for the rest, a source of material for the rest of the world, and continue to be left behind. Those opportunities will never wait forever. So we need to understand the urgency in that, so that we forget all these differences, our nationalism, and come together. And that's what she started with. She talked about our nationalism. That nationalism, you see it today, to get a visa to go to the US is next to impossible. We do it to our own Africans.
Indeed.
I used to find it easier to travel to Europe than going, say, to West Africa. Because that is how we were designed, to hate each other and despise each other, but to love the rest.
And yet, this is one of those issues, and President Ruto addressed himself to this, and there's been this conversation where we need a visa-free Africa. And we've had this talk for a very, very, very long time. And the visa requirements within the regional blocks are essentially killing intra-Africa trades. You talk to people who are doing business, you'd rather go to Turkey and import stuff from Turkey. You'd rather go to Dubai, do your importations from Dubai. You'd rather go to China and do importations from China. But if today somebody who wants to run a clothing business decides they want to go to Ghana or Nigeria and do the importation, it is almost next to impossible. And yet, we are within Africa. And I'm just looking at some statistics here, and this is coming from what President Ruto said. The intra-COMESA trade, and though there is a talk that it's improving, still accounts for a very small share of the total trade. Africa contributes only 3% to global trade. 3%. And only 14% to intra-Africa trade. So 3% globally, 14% within ourselves. Yet, Europe, the one that you actually mentioned earlier, you compare to Europe, it accounts for 70% of their trade in intra-European. In Asia, they trade 60% of all their products and services within Asia. I've been to India many times. What they produce can be consumed within, and they're comfortable and they're okay with it. Yet here, we talk about the spirit of COMESA, but if we're only doing 3% globally and only 14% within the continent, there is a bigger problem to address here.
You know, since you quoted the Bible this morning, I'll start with the Bible. You know, when Jesus found that blind person, and, he opened the blind person's eyes. The first time he asked the blind person, what do you see? He says, I can't see clearly. Then he now spat again and put some clear around his face and the person could see clearly. We are in an era that we are still a little hazy. We can't see the picture you have just painted. When you mention trade figures, trade actually is a parameter that shows the level of industrialization or a level of economic efficiency. Those two aspects, they work together very, very well. Industrialization and efficiency. And so Africa, how does Africa kick in terms of industrialization? Today, if you look at Africa, what we export, it is raw materials. And let me tell you, for the product of raw material, 1 unit of your raw material, when it gets to Europe, it multiplies 15 times the value you got. So hence, if all our raw materials are going to Europe, they're going to China, they're going to US, that's where things happen. And once they have happened there, they trade with each other because the economies are interlinked. Ours, we send raw materials, they are transformed there, and we buy them back. And when we buy them back, what you sent as raw material, now you are buying it back 15 times the value of what you got. Hence, your value of your imports is that big, and when you export was that small. Mm. That is the challenge we face. And so if we don't industrialize, let me tell you, at one time I used to be director of industry in this country, in COMESA. It was an anathema to talk about industrialization. In fact, people thought you were mad.
Mm. Why?
Because that is not your game. Mm. Your game was small-scale industries, do agriculture, do social sectors, because that's what they thought you could do best. Mm. But Africa, today, of course, now we can talk. How many countries have got a large iron and steel industry in Africa? Can you name one? So these cars you drive around, and you came in transport, that metal that brought you, where is it manufactured? Mm. But Africa has the raw materials for that car. That is the thing. Let me give an example. So that is why Africa's value of global trade is only 3%, and it will only improve. The second question about is efficiency.
Yes.
Efficiency. To move trade, you mentioned West Africa. Mm-hmm. To move products from West Africa to bring them to Africa here. One time, I was giving an example at the COMESA meeting the other time when I was telling them, there's a time when we had plenty of maize in Uganda, and we had serious shortage of maize in Zambia. I was in Zambia at that time, and under COMESA. We found the Uganda maize cheaper at the farm price than the maize that was in Brazil. When we tried to move it, by the time it would arrive in Zambia, the maize from Brazil would beat it by almost 20%.
From Uganda to Zambia?
Can you figure out how you move that maize from Uganda to Zambia? Just figure out in your head.
I'm just trying to imagine through trucks.
That time the transportation system, particularly through Tanzania, was impossible. Mm. The roads were not working well. I mean, the potholes all over. Now you might move much better because what COMESA and the East African community have done by bringing the Northern Corridor. So you had to get maize from Uganda to Mombasa, put them on a ship to Durban, from Durban to Zambia, and you are crossing many countries to do that. From Brazil by ship to Durban is shorter. It took you about 4 or 5 days, and then now you can bring it up. From here to Durban, it will take you 3 or 4 weeks. That is the challenge we have. Mm. Efficiency of trade in Africa. Even to trade with each other, we need, first of all, infrastructure. That is one of the major handicaps of intra-African cooperation.
And is it lack of opportunity? Because let me give an example. Because you earlier talked about raw minerals. Let's talk about diamonds, for example. And I was watching this documentary, and they were talking about, this was Belgium, and Antwerp, which is called the diamond capital of the world. There's so much diamond, yet they don't mine any diamonds in Belgium. Mm-hmm. And you're trying to look at 80% of world's rough diamonds and around 50% of polished diamonds are actually transiting through Antwerp, for example.
Yes.
But if you retrace your steps, you look at where they're coming from. So you have Botswana, you have DR Congo,
Yes.
you have Angola, you have South Africa, you have Namibia, you have Sierra Leone, you've got Zimbabwe. All these are African countries.
Yes.
Now, all these African countries can come together and say, okay, if all our diamonds are going to these countries and they are polished, they're like you said, the value increases 15 times. Why can't we then insist and say, let us mine and let us produce everything that needs to be produced through diamonds locally. Then we sell it to Europe.
Yes.
But if you walk into a shop today, want to buy a diamond ring, the cost of buying that diamond ring, if you're in Angola, for example, will be 100 times.
Yes.
Yeah.
100 times the cost.
Yes.
Why can't we have a conversation around building this? If these are, instead of having these trade conversations that we need to, we're looking at these percentages. If what you've raised, efficiency, for example, is one of those issues, where are leaders not having these conversations?
It's said and done, but it's not that conversation is not in the room. The problem is the will.
There's no goodwill.
And the courage to be able to overcome this nationalism and do it. And also take bold steps and go through some of the pains so that you can be able to free yourself from this international, what you might call economic architecture that is designed in such a way that you participate in low-value activities.
So we are still being colonized.
Of course.
We're not free.
Who told you are free, Dennis? Who told you are free?
You sit at the A, you tell us more.
So we're actually still being colonized. We're not independent.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, for goodness sake.
Economic slavery is still going on. Economic slavery is still going on. Yeah, and that's why Nkrumah said, yes, you have flags flying around that you are independent.
Yeah.
But it's empty shell.
But what do we expect if if the organization that's supposed to be promoting African unity is funded by these same powers, these same countries who you're hoping to get this economic freedom from? How would that ever happen?
But you have changed your tune. At one stage you said that these are externally funded. Now you are saying they are funded by countries.
No, but they're
so which is
funded,
which now?
No, same thing, externally funded. And I said the same thing, and I'm saying it again now.
But
how do we expect to actually have unity or freedom
if
the AU itself is externally funded? How?
That's your answer. Who pays the piper calls the tune. And it isn't that we don't have the capacity to finance it. It is because we have no will, we have no capacity. Because if we had made that decision to say, yes, we are going to fully finance African Union, empower, give African Union good mandate. Because if you think even of when we talked of, say, one voice, if everybody that was to speak said, let Addis Ababa speak and you're Tosha, we are not going to speak, what Addis has said is what stands for us. And then we say, we're going to China to negotiate infrastructure agreement. Send bureaucrats from Addis Ababa to go and negotiate on our behalf. But do you think Kenya, do you think Mozambique, do you think Uganda will accept that you send people from Addis to go and speak on our behalf? We want to project our own influence. We want to, and that's why we defend small pseudo-states, as one time Museveni called them. Because if you think about it, just think, you have nation states that are 500,000 people, 1 million, 2 million, they are not economically viable. And the majority of African countries are of that size.
But
even the size of the economies, what you may call purchasing power is so small that you cannot have meaningful industrialization.
But look at what happened in Europe. Let's take the example of Greece.
Yes.
Greece fell through the cracks. Economically, it was bankrupt. And they were essentially not going, and then there was talks that they would be dropped from the European Union because of the fact that they would not measure up to 1, 2, 3 standards. They said, you know what, these are the standards for you to be part of the union. You need to do 1, 2, 3. You're not doing that. They could have left them to fall by the way as a pseudo state, as it were, if you were to apply the same thing that Museveni did to some of these countries in Africa. But what did the European Union do? They were put on a plan. They said, no, we're not going to leave you by the way. They got to the point whereby Greece became viable again. They made them essentially look at, okay, what is it going to take for you to come back onto the ramp? And let's ensure that that is actually done until it actually happened. And that's what I call unity. That's what I call saying,
Absolutely.
okay, you know what, nobody's going to fall by the way. For us to be able to speak in one voice, this is what we ought to do. That's the point where you get to when you know that you're actually operating in a unified sense. It seems to me that we still have a very, very long way to go if we don't even understand the very tenets of what unity is as an African nation. As an African nation, I'm going to say it like that, as an African nation, and then even going further to a continent. If we don't understand the basics, can we really operate without a simple comprehension of what we ought to be doing?
No, you've said it very well. I mean, I can't add on top of what you have said. You've really captured the spirit of the challenge that we have. You know, knowledge, again, going back to Dennis's Bible quotation this morning, if you go to the book of Hosea, it says very clearly that my people perish because of what? Lack of knowledge. And I don't know whether I would call it lack of knowledge, but also in some cases, wisdom, because everybody now has access to this. Anybody that you meet understands. They all talk about neo-colonialism, they talk of whatever it is. But when you comes to do, you say, okay, let's now go this way. You know, you mentioned Greece. Greece was rescued by the European Union, not IMF, because they understood. Where do we run to? Is it that Africa has not put on the table a proposal to create an African monetary fund? Has it taken off? No. I mean, if I give you an example, if you look at, say, COMESA created the bank, which is Trade and Development Bank. Today, it is one of the last resort lenders of Kenya. And you saw the other day, the president announced that he's going to continue to invest about 100 million in COMESA Bank because they can now see the benefits. If we start making those kind of steps, understanding that having our own instruments, our own institutions, then we are better off.
You know,
but the moment you rely on others to come and rescue you, they have their own agenda. If you think of the IMF World Bank, they were created at the back of the Second World War. And what was the reason for having those instruments? The victors of the war designed the global architecture so that they can control and they command it so that their values can continue to run the global economy. And that's why you hear people continue to complain that we must democratize the global financial architecture. So that is why Europe has gone a step ahead, and they don't go to borrow IMF, World Bank, and the rest. They have only their own instruments.
And that's why they don't like emerging leaders, like, for example, Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traore.
Exactly.
And talking about, borrowing, for example, there's a lot of rollback in terms of policy that Traore brought into his country.
Yes.
And among the issues, still talking about trade and all that, he, for example, decided, you know what? We are going to move to nationalize or reclaim ownership of foreign-owned gold mines and these diamonds. We're going to own them. And they will all come under the state control. And he suspended export permits for Ticino Gold to crack down on illicit trade. So this is about corruption, because a lot of people are finding avenues then to trade through those in the black market, for example. Then there's a lot that he did. I remember watching a story where school uniforms for children in Burkina Faso, they were all imported from China. And they said, look, we have our very own mothers, fathers, people who are very well trained, who can actually do tailoring. Why don't we do this ourselves? And they started tailoring their own school uniforms, nothing imported.
Even judges.
Yeah, including judges.
Yeah.
In terms of agriculture, because Burkina Faso is what, 5 million or around that number. I don't know about the GDP, but that population is half the population of Kenya. Yet, what then Traore ended up doing is saying, look, our 3 core sectors that help our economy is what? Agriculture. What did Traore do? He started purchasing tractors, sending it to the villages so that they can improve on farming and so that they can feed themselves and
export.
Rather than importing maize, for example, importing all these things. Does it take, in your opinion, somebody who has the kind of mind that Traore has then to change around the country and by extension even changing the whole continent? Is that the kind of leadership that then the continent needs
exactly
to compete with Europe?
Dennis, I'm glad you brought that point, and I'll give you an anecdote. One time my chairman and I went to see a head of state. I think for diplomatic reasons, let me not quote that name of head of state. And he closed the door and they told us that, look, my uranium all goes to France. If today I make noise and they say you are not giving us a fair price, I will lose my seat. You remember even when Bagbo in Cote d'Ivoire challenged the franc, the currency, and said, look, we cannot have our central bank sitting in Paris. We must democratize this. And for us to have our own central bank here, where did the Bagbo end? An ICC. And the rest of it. So this is part of that global architecture, as you put.
So wait.
And when you mentioned, I don't
on.
want us to leave this room whining and feeling that the glass is empty. I always see it as half full, because the case you mentioned of Burkina Faso is part of that journey that people are now starting to say with the pressure, because Burkina Faso has had the longest relationship with some of its former colonial, but remaining one of the poorest countries. And yet, the population, the Gen Z, he himself is very young. That is the transformation that we can start to see, that Africa is not going to sit idle and will not have that patience. And so our leaders, to me, I always say, we either lead from the front or the population will lead you.
And that takes me to the next question, which is, if you look at the continent average age, it is said it is the continent with the youngest population.
Correct.
And human capital can only be found in the continent.
Correct.
And you look at what is happening, look at what has happened in Madagascar, look at what happened in Kenya with the Gen Z moving, and the pressure that they have in terms of, we deserve this change.
Yes.
Our African leaders are seeing at their populations and their demands and what they need, and look at it as a turning point to do things better, because if they don't change, they will be forced to change. Case in example, Burkina Faso.
Let's deal with that. I'm sorry to cut you so short. You know, when she gave the intro at the beginning, she talked about the geopolitical tensions that are there. What is informing some of these geopolitical tensions? The rest of the world is worried that Africa, being young, by the year 2100, out of 4 human beings on earth, 1 will be an African. And the rest of Europe is aging, declining. In fact, it might even more. And so, as you rightly mentioned, Africa being youthful, we are sitting on a gold mine. But this gold mine is only good if it can be exploited and then processed. Now, we have a population, and we all keep on saying a population. The population is there, yes. Africa is 1.3 billion people, but that population remains potential because we are not giving them good skills. We are not giving them jobs so that they can then be productive. They become a market, they produce even more. So if we start turning with people like what we are seeing Traore and the rest doing, yes, we now turn our potential into economic power. But as it is at the moment, we're just sitting on it, and this will turn out to be about a cake and become a time bomb to us. But Africa has an opportunity to come to the table and transform this today. Yes.
Of course, there's a future, and it's the hope that we can walk into that future with, guns fully loaded. There's a lot of work to be done, and many units towards that. Thank you so much for joining us on this. And, we're of course, enjoying the serialization of this book.
Wow.
Time is gone.
Yeah.
Erastus Mwencha, former COMESA Secretary General, has joined us in this conversation this morning. Looking forward to many more.
Thank you so much.
Enjoying, of course, reading that book.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.